Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Gods and Myths of Northern Europe, Part 7. Today we will be reading The Ransom of Otter. Okay, so let's get to it. Odin and Loki also play a part in the story of the Otter's ransom, which leads on to the famous tale of the hero Sigurd the Volsung. The two gods were wandering through the world with Honir one day when they saw an otter on the edge of the water fall drowsily eating a salmon. Loki flung a stone at the otter and bragged of his double catch. But when that night they stopped at the house of a man called Hrodmar, it transpired that the otter was his son in animal form, and he and his other sons, Fafnir and Regan, threatened to slay the gods in revenge. They had to agree to the ransom imposed by Hrodmar, which was to fill the otter with skin with gold and then pile the gold over it until it was hidden from the sight. To do this, Loki had to catch the dwarf Envari, who was hiding in the shape of a fish, and make him give up the great golden treasure which he was known to possess. The dwarf tried hard to hold on to a little gold ring, which he had said would help him to become rich again, but which would bring destruction on all who possessed it. Loki, however, insisted on taking that too. It was needed in the end, since when the gold covered the skin, one whisker could still be seen. The ring was used to hide it. It is for this reason that poets use such names for gold as Otter's ransom, or forced payment of the Aesir. The wonderful golden treasure only brought ruin to the house of Hrodmar in the end, but his sons slew him in their greed, and then Fafnir turned himself into a dragon and lay upon the gold. His brother Regan urged on the young hero Sigurd the Volsung to slay the dragon, but when Sigurd discovered Regan was tricking him, he slew him as well. Sigurd came into possession of Envari's ring when he took over the treasure, and this ring ultimately caused his own death and much unhappiness. Myths outside of the Prose Edda. This concludes the series of stories given in the Prose Edda about the gods and their doings. We can add to them one more story in the form of narrative poem, very similar in spirit to those in Snorri's collection. This is the tale of how the giant Thrym stole Thor's hammer, and the unknown poet tells it with the same ironic humor and imaginative delight which distinguishes Snorri's myths. This poem is found in the Elder Edda. The theft of Thor's hammer. The story goes that one day Thor discovered that his hammer had been stolen, and he called on Loki to find out what had become of it. Loki borrowed Freya's falcon shape and went out to search, and he found at last that the giant Thrym had hidden the hammer deep down in the earth, and refused to return it unless he were given Freya as his wife. This message caused great consternation in Asgard, and sent Freya into a great rage. She shattered her famous necklace as she panted with fury. But Heimdall suggested a plan to get back the hammer without risk to Freya. Thor was to wrap himself in a bridal veil and return to Jotunheim in Freya's place, accompanied by Loki disguised as the bride's handmaid. At first Thor thought such a disguise beneath his dignity, but Loki reminded him, tartly, that without the hammer there was no hope for Asgard. Thunder and lightning rent the mountains as they drove off in Thor's chariot, and when they entered Jotunheim, they received an enthusiastic welcome. At the feast that night, all was nearly discovered because of the bride's voracious appetite, but Loki quickly explained that the reason why Freya was able to eat an ox and ate salmon was because her ardent longings for the wedding had kept her fasting for 8 nights. Again, when Thrym tried to kiss the bride, he was terrified by a glimpse of the god's terrible burning eyes beneath the veil. But Loki explained that Freya had no sleep for 8 nights, so intense was her longing for Jotunheim. Thor's ordeal came to an end when the hammer was at last brought into the hollow the bridal couple. It lay in the lap of the bride. Once he had his hands upon it, it was not long before Thrym and all the wedding party were slain, and Thor returned with Loki in triumph to Asgard. The Truce with the Vanir. Here, then, is one myth which Snorri for some reason did not include in his stories about Thor. We know that there were others known to him which were not used in the Prose Edda, since some were introduced into another of his works, Yngla Saga. This gives the history of Sweden from very early times, and includes an account of the ending of the war between the Aesir and the Vanir. We are told that when the truce had been made, the Vanir sent as hostages two of their foremost men, Njord and Frey. In return, the Aesir sent Honir, who was tall and handsome, and Mimir, who was very wise. But Honir was of little use in council because he was so silent, and the Vanir felt that they had not had a fair exchange. They cut off Mimir's head and sent it to the Aesir. Then Odin took the head and sang spells over it, and was able to talk with it and learn hidden matters. Jifion. In the same saga there is a story about Jifion, whose name Snorri included among the goddesses. She was sent by Odin to look for land, and the king Gylfi of Sweden offered her as much land as she could plow. Gefion visited a giant, had 4 sons by him, and changed these into a team of oxen. With her mighty team she plowed round Zealand, the island on which Copenhagen stands, and separated it from Sweden. After this she dwelt at Lear with Skuld, son of Odin. Other myths about the gods and their dealings with Danish kings and heroes are found in the work of Danish scholar who lived in the 12th century, Saxo Grammaticus. His stories are badly told in complex, pompous Latin, and are frequently muddled, repetitive, and spoiled by moralizing. They have none of the charm of Snorri's work, but they contain material of much interest and value. Other myths are implied or referred to in mythological poems about the gods, some of which are in the form of questions and answers exchanged between the two supernatural beings, who test one another's knowledge. The dealings of the gods with famous heroes of old time have not been mentioned in this chapter. There are many stories about them in the heroic poems and legendary sagas, and these will be referred to from time to time in the course of this book. Other lost myths can be guessed at from the mythological imagery used by Skaldic poets. Although it must be realized that Snorri's tales do not exhaust our knowledge about the gods, they do, however, form a good starting point for study. He gives us an impressive picture of the universe, with the world tree in the center. We see the gods in never-ending competition with the giants and monsters to threaten their peace and menace their world. We see them divide amongst themselves by jealousness and quarrels, yet ready to combine against a common enemy when the danger becomes acute. Snorri traces for us the beginning of the universe from the primeval heat and cold which existed before the worlds. He lets us realize that it cannot last forever, since the hostile forces must triumph for a while when the present worlds are overthrown at Ragnarok. Before a new cycle begins in preserving the finest of the myths for us, he has also sent them in a memorable framework. Yet he leaves many questions unanswered. This no doubt will already be obvious to the reader. Who, for instance, were the 12 great gods of whom Snorri speaks? Was there, so to speak, an official list? And are figures like Honir, Casavir, Hodir, Mimir to be included amongst the 12? Were the first man, first woman created from the body of Ymir, or from trees on the seashore? Did Thor kill the world serpent before Ragnarok? Is Asgard to be thought of as above the earth, or beside it, under a root of the world tree? Was the tree standing before the creation of the worlds? Why is first Thor and then Odin called the father of the gods? What happened to the other sons of Bor? Why are the Vanir at war with the Aesir? Some of these questions had probably occurred to Snorri, but as instance of the fate of the Midgard serpent in the fishing adventure, he may have been unable to give an answer. There's also the deeper question of how far these gods and the myths ever claimed real worship and allegiance from men. Some of the stories are clearly skillful literary efforts, primarily for entertainment. How much real belief existed in the background? And Thor and Loki serious or comic figures? Can we respect these sometimes naive and childish characters of the myths as Snorri represents them? It is with some of these questions, and in particular with these last, that this book is concerned. To find a simple answer to them may be difficult, and in some cases impossible. We can only attempt a reasoned survey of the gods who appear in the myths, based on our present knowledge. Ooh. Okay, so, my love of Power Cats, that is all for today, and tune in next Friday when I read Chapter 2, The Gods of Battle. And stay tuned tomorrow and Sunday when I do my Seer's Isle playthrough again. So, see you tomorrow and stay tuned.